I'm going to call this session to order. Welcome to the Pocatello League presentation, Criminal Justice Reinvestment in Idaho. The League of Women Voters of the United States adopted a position on sentencing policy in 2012. League believes alternatives to imprisonment should be explored and utilized, taking into consideration the circumstances and the nature of the crime. League also opposes mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenses. Emerging research is changing what is known about what works in criminal justice to reduce recidivism and to engage public safety. I would like to acknowledge our League members here today. I would like to start by thanking Muriel Roberts, because this is her brainchild, and we just appreciate that. And then I am going to turn the time over to Annie, who is one of the event coordinators, to introduce the panelists.
Hello, good evening. My name is Annie Harrison. I'm a proud member and secretary of the League of Women Voters. I'm also an ISU student, political science major, on my last year of this hall. Welcome, thank you, all of you, the panel members, for your time sharing your expertise this evening. The Reinvestment Bill, HB 1357, was signed into law in March of 2014 by Governor Butch Otter. Speaking with Senator Patty Ann Lodge, who has been an advocate and a committee chairman for our judicial system since 2001 to date, including Idaho Criminal Justice Committee, Idaho Meth Project, Advisory Board, and Board of Juvenile Corrections, and many more, including the co-chairman of the Criminal Reinvestment Committee, and now the chairman of State Affairs. Senator Lodge graciously, during session, gave me about an hour of her time to explain that they have in 2019 session met and continued to work diligently on this area of concern. In the last meeting, being 2/15/2019, Senator Lodge wrote a resolution to extend the House bill for 3 years. Reading through the House Bill 1357 in the minutes of the last meeting that are available on legislature website, it requests changing the criteria for probation and parole and directing more funds towards reinvesting in offenders with probation and parole departments, other than in our overpopulated prison system. Sorry, I just got over being sick, so like everybody, so it's tough. The caseload for probation and parole are what we should be funding with more officers. They are the officers that work directly with the offender in the community. More officers means more time with offenders and offering community-based help. As she explained to me, number one, the most important being the protection of the community. Number two, the prior activity of the offender and the mental evaluations ordered. Number three, changing the criteria of sentencing and the primary consideration the judge gives in his decision. I'd like to now introduce our commentator for the panel tonight, Lisa Smith.
Thank you, Annie, for that great update on the bill. Annie has done a lot of legwork to make this happen, so a lot of these people wouldn't be here if it weren't for her. So I just want to let you guys know what to expect from tonight's panel discussion. We have some experts here that are going to discuss reincarceration and the effects of the legislation. We have provided a handout. I cheated and I stole this 2 pages from an Idaho Department of Corrections report to the legislator from 2008. I thought they did a wonderful job of introducing the bill and what it was about. And then also on page 2 of it, they give you the executive summary that talks about the cost savings to taxpayers and also what concrete steps have been taken as a result of the legislation. So after each panel, we're going to have our panelists speak first, and then we will have a question and answer period at the end. When that happens, we just ask if you have a question that you come up to the mic and address it to whoever your question is to. So we're going to start with Katrina Running and her group from the ISU Department of Sociology, Social Work, and Criminology. So Katrina Running is the
No worries.
Associate Professor and Director of Graduate Studies at ISU. We have Dr. D. I'm so
Okay.
sorry. She is assistant professor of sociology at Idaho State University. She has brought in with her her graduate student, Taylor Richardson. She's working, her thesis right now is studying incarceration in Bannock County, so she offers a great local perspective. And then we also have Stephanie Taylor Silva, who is a returning citizen, just here to share her perspective. So at this point, I'm going to turn the time over to you ladies.
Okay, yeah, holler at me if I start going on too long, because I can talk forever about this. All right, so I just want to talk maybe briefly a little bit about what community corrections are, in case people don't know, because it covers a lot, right? So it can cover people who are on probation, so that's community supervision for people who've been convicted of a felony offense, and they've been given a suspended sentence or a withheld judgment. And so they're staying here in the community, and they're accessing services, and they're also being supervised in the community. Parole is for after, right, a period of incarceration, right, and it's community supervision for people who've been released before the end of their sentences. Right? So it continues through. Right? And then there's something we call retained jurisdiction or rider. And so these are folks who are sentenced to a period of incarceration, right, which varies. But in that, they are getting extra, right, educational programming, also some counseling kind of programming, right, service programming. If they are able to complete, right, they don't flop their rider, if they're able to complete it, then they're eligible to be released on probation. So that's just a little bit of what we're talking about when we're talking about community corrections. So we're primarily focusing here on women tonight. And some of women's issues. And I just wanted to take a quick look at this. This is from 2018. This is from the IDOC website. This is from February 2018. And this is what the prison population looked like then. So what I'm really interested in here with the women is if we look at the age group of the women, right? Most of the women are between 25 and 44. And so this is when women are likely to have children. Okay? And so this is going to structure some of their issues, right, when they're coming home, when women are coming home, or when they're being supervised on probation. Right? And as we see, if we look at community corrections, it's a very similar pattern for the women. And this is something that actually, when we look nationally, women are much more likely to have sole custody of children. And so. And this really impacts the family when women are incarcerated, but also when women come back home on parole or they're on if they're on probation. Right? Having to take care of kids, right, can make things a little bit more difficult. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. This is also really important when we're looking at community corrections by crime group. Now, this includes men and women. Right? Drug and property offenders are the most common. Right, but when we're looking at these are also folks who are at a higher risk for recidivism, and especially if we're thinking about substance abuse, because of the nature, even if somebody is really committed to recovery, the nature of recovery is such that relapse is a part of that. And so people will relapse multiple times on the way to recovery. Recovery is a process. We can think about it that way. I know I'm probably laying a lot on you, so if anybody has any questions, I can answer them later. This is what we call the risks, needs, and responsivity model, and so this is what a lot of the programming, right, that's offered while people are incarcerated, but also while people are in community corrections. Right? This is a model that a lot of the programming is based on. Right? And so we use something called the level of service inventory. Right, or in this case, the level of service inventory revised. And it's basically a assessment instrument, or you could call it maybe even a screening instrument, that we use to determine people's risks and need levels. Right, so what are somebody's problems? Right, so when they're heading into the prison, what are their problems? When they're coming back out and they're on parole, right, what are the issues that they're going to be facing? What can we help with? Right. And also, this is used for people who are on probation. And so a couple of things that are really important from this model that we can look at are the risk, needs, and responsivity model runs on something called criminogenic need principle, where we have people who commit offenses often have multiple needs, right? So, particularly when we're looking at women, we may be looking at histories of trauma, right? So, experiencing child maltreatment, experiencing sexual assault, right, or physical abuse. We may see people who have chemical dependencies, right, or alcohol use disorders. We may also see folks who have behavioral health issues, and those behavioral health issues may often go along with trauma. So thinking about PTSD, for example. And these are things that we can do stuff about, right? So what's really good about this model, what's really important, is that it just doesn't say that's it. Right? This is all this person is ever going to be. Right? It's about being able to provide services, to be able to provide assistance, to help people. Right? Because nobody's ever static. We all grow and change. So when we think about criminogenic needs, these are what we call dynamic risk factors, right? That we can actually target and that would change the likelihood of recidivism. So if we can target somebody's substance abuse disorder, right? If we can help somebody into recovery, right? If we can help somebody with their behavioral health needs, right? Or somebody is super, super impulsive, right? It's high levels of impulsivity combined with high levels of aggression, right? You can help somebody learn how to control their temper. It's called ART, right? That's one of the things that we use. Aggression replacement therapy, actually helping people think through interactions and situations and practice. Right? So these are all things that we can use to help target these needs. Right? And then people also have strengths. Right? They have protective factors. And we try to use those, right, to help build people up. Right? To help, and they're what we might call buffers. Sorry, I'm kind of moving a little fast, but so women are a special case when we look at incarceration, and especially when we look at reentry, or when we look at community corrections. So when we look at women have what we call gendered pathways to crime. So this is something that's really important right here that contributes to that. So women who are incarcerated and women who are in community corrections have higher levels of poor physical health, right, and behavioral health. They also have higher levels of behavioral health disorders, right, than men in prison populations, and also than women in the general population. Right? So they have higher levels of those needs. So they have pretty intense needs for physical and behavioral health care, behavioral and mental health care. Approximately, now this, I've seen some variation in this number. I've seen some numbers as high as 60%, but the latest statistic that I could find is that approximately 50% of women who are in prison report having experienced physical or sexual abuse, right, prior to going to prison. Right, so that trauma, right, is intense, and that trauma then has impacts on behavioral health, and it also has impacts on physical health. Right? It's the idea that that trauma stays with you in your body. And so this impacts women because if you have that experience and you have a higher likelihood for substance abuse, right, you also have a more difficult time parenting your children, right, when you've experienced such high levels of trauma. When we're looking at women in prison, the experience of intimate partner violence becomes very important as well. Right? And this is really important when we're thinking about community corrections. Because if a woman is in a home that is unstable and is characterized by intimate partner violence, this increases the risk of relapse. Right? And it also increases the risk of participating in other behaviors that can lead to recidivism, right, or to failing parole or probation. Another problem that often comes up with women is something called the girlfriend problem. So for example, and I saw this a lot in New York City when I was doing my dissertation, is that when you see women are often involved in low levels, particularly when we look at drug dealing, in terms of low levels of offending, right? But their intimate partner is the one who's in charge. it's very difficult to break out of that kind of a situation, especially if there's intimate partner violence involved. So women's pathways into offending are slightly different than men's, but then that also means that they have particular issues when they're trying to come home. And so kind of quickly, just to give you an overview of women's needs, right? And this is national, and then Taylor is going to address local. Right? In terms of if we're thinking about women's needs, this is what's been found nationally, that women have a significant need for chemical dependency treatment, physical and mental health care. When we're looking at, and I mean, some of these things, it seems kind of almost like we kind of take these things for granted, such as transportation. But for many women who are returning home from prison, they may not be allowed to have their license. So they're not able to drive. If you can't drive, and here it's really important to be able to drive. So if you don't drive, then you've got to try to move yourself into a place where you're going to be on the bus route. And there's not a whole lot of bus routes in Idaho. So safe and stable housing. This is really, really important. Housing security for women, it contributes significantly to recidivism, especially when we're looking at things such as women participating in sex work, which is a common crime of what we call a crime of subsistence, right? Needing to participate in sex work for needs to be able to afford your housing. Right? It becomes extra important when a woman has children. We're also going to be looking at the need for childcare and parenting services. For a woman to be able to access education or to be able to access job training, if she has a primary custody of the children, she needs to be able to have a safe place, right? A safe, good place to have those kids in while she's doing training or while she's working. And yeah, employers tend to get a little crabby if you miss a lot of days because your kid is sick, right? Or because you have your childcare arrangements have fallen through. So that's really important for women to be able to maintain job training and to be able to maintain employment. Also thinking about positive social support. This is key. And I know this is something that parole and probation here in District 6 and also in District 7 have really been working on, is trying to provide that support. What is the name of the mentoring program?
Free to Succeed.
Free to Succeed, right, which is a really good example of that, where it's community members and also formerly incarcerated folks who've already gone through the system who are there to act as mentors. Right? That becomes really important because it's somebody, one, who can listen to you and kind of, everybody gets that way. You can imagine if you come out of prison, or especially, you're almost in a panic, right? And things are completely different for you, and you don't know how to get things organized, but you got to hit the ground running because you have requirements from the Department of Parole and Probation. You want to hit the ground running because you want to be back with your family, right? You want to do the best that you can. But I've run into people so many times who have like panic attacks. Well, that's where that positive social support comes in. Right? And so that's one of the really important things that we need to think about, both as academics and also as community members, is how is it possible to provide that for people who are coming out. Okay, take it away, Taylor.
So I'm in the master's program in sociology, and part of how I can graduate is I have to do a thesis. So I chose to do my thesis in the Bannock County Jail. I'm really interested in looking at recidivism rates and trying to lower them, and kind of what we can do to do that, especially in the county level. A lot of research focuses on prisons and like federal prisons at that. And so I'm more interested at the county level what we can do to reduce recidivism. And so for my thesis, I did a survey at Bannock County Jail, kind of asking those who were currently incarcerated at the time what they were needing upon getting out of jail, just kind of basic needs to get them back on their feet and to hopefully not get them back into jail. And so I threw up some demographics just to show you kind of who we were looking at. I focused on the women particularly. There was about 150 total. So out of that, 49 women did the survey. And it looked like the age range was between 18 and 48 years old. And then their ethnicity, we had about 80% of them who were white or identified as white, 22% were Native American, 12% Hispanic, 4% African American, and then 4% other. And then their education levels, we had 16% who had less than a high school diploma, 12% GED, 35% high school graduate, and then 33% some college, and 4% college graduate. So that kind of just gives you a background of who we're asking and who we're talking to on the survey. And this is kind of what they reported. So the biggest need that they reported is food security. So that would be anything between food stamps or food or access to food pantries, anything like that. That was what they reported to being the most important to them. So about 80% of them reported that. And then right below that is housing. So that was 73% of the women reported that they really need help with housing. And then substance abuse treatment, which is close third, 71% of women need that to help them transition into the community and stay out of jail. Resume assistance, that was 69% of women. Mental health treatment, 65% of women reported needing that, getting out. DMV access, so that's also like just to get your ID, not just necessarily your driver's license, but just to get your ID, because if you want to get a job, you need to have an ID. So 65% of women reported needing that. And transportation was one of the last ones that was still pretty high. 61% of women reported needing transportation. And transportation is really important. If you want to have a job, you need to be able to get there. If you have children, you need to be able to transport them to and from school and whatnot. So that's also a really important need that the Bannock County women reported needing when they get out of jail. Another important thing about the study is that I believe out of all of the participants, I think it was 98% of them had reported being incarcerated before. So we are talking to people who know how it is to transition out of jail and come back in and do the back and forth throughout their life.
Okay. Questions?
Anybody have any? Do you want to do questions now, or do we just want to move to Stephanie?
I think we'll save questions to the end, but if you guys have a perspective you'd like to add to that would be great.
Okay, so I'm Stephanie Taylor Silva. I am a person in long-term recovery from methamphetamine and cocaine addiction. And for me, that looks like I haven't used methamphetamine or cocaine since May 23rd of 2010. I am a formerly incarcerated person. I went to prison in Idaho at the South Boise Women's Correctional Center. I had been under some sort of supervision since I was a teenager. Went to prison when I was 18 years old. Started abusing drugs when I was 14. I come from a very dysfunctional family. I'm a survivor of childhood abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, human trafficking, sexual assault, and attempted murder on my life, and thyroid cancer. So all of those self-identified needs that Ms. Taylor just spoke about, those are everything there directly affected my life, and how I was able to put my life back together was having all of those needs met. Because I had all of those needs met so effectively with the Department of Corrections when I received treatment in there and when I got out on supervision, I was able to get into college. Dr. Levine is actually my professor at ISU. She's been my professor a couple times at ISU. So I graduated with a degree in criminology, and I'm currently studying sociology. And I actually work with the Department of Correction now. Where you were identifying pro-social needs, I can speak about our program. So I am the Free to Succeed Mentor Site Coordinator for District 7 Probation and Parole. I can't stress enough just how critical it is for people that are re-entering back into our communities, not just Pocatello, but every community in Idaho, that they have strong support. They have that strong positive support, and that they're able to get all of these needs met. When I went into prison and when I got out of prison, I had a really great plan. My case manager had put together this wonderful plan for me. Everything seemed like it was going to go well, but when I hit the streets, my housing, everything fell apart. It was given away to somebody else, and I literally had nothing. I walked from the jail when I got out of jail to check in with my parole officer. I was in shower sandals, my prison t-shirt, jeans, and a prison ID. I had absolutely nothing. My parole officer was my backbone during my recovery until I was able to get a backbone myself. I relied heavily on our district manager, who is now my boss, my parole officer, and other supervising officers in my district. They helped me with things like simple things that we take for granted every day, like where I was going to eat, where I was going to get my mental health medications, how I was going to see a doctor, how I was going to get back and forth from treatment. My parole officer helped me meet all of those needs, and when I finally started feeling like I was strong enough that I could make some headway in the community, she helped me get into school. My parole officer actually went over to ISU with me and helped me enroll in school. That was a pretty wild appointment for them that day. They said they didn't see too many armed officers come in helping people fill out financial aid applications, but she did. And because of the Department of Corrections support, I've been able to be very successful, as well as the other strong supports that I've received in the community. So. You want me to add anything else?
I guess maybe when we come to like the discussions and that kind of thing, we could
Okay.
kind of bounce off each other and everybody.
Okay.
It's on me.
I'll introduce you
Oh,
really
thank you.
quick. Thank you so much for sharing your story.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And for putting a personal face on something that really, can seem so impersonal. That was really moving. Sorry. So recidivism issues are a big part of our growing prison population. The information that you guys shared has been extremely helpful in shedding light, especially on our local statistics, and the risks for recidivism that people face as they come out of our corrections system. I think, it was great information to help start a discussion about what else can be done, especially at the community level, to address some of these needs, especially mental and behavioral health, substance abuse support, and then the need for positive social support. So that was great information. Thank you guys very much. Now, SB 1357 does recommend a lot of changes to the probation and parole system. Jimmy Gentry is the district manager of probation and parole, and he is here to offer his perspective on the impact of those changes.
Thank you. So my name is Jimmy Gentry. I'm newly appointed district manager of District 6 Probation and Parole, so about 60 days in case I stutter or say something wrong. A little bit about my background is I began as a correctional officer at Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in 2005. Worked there as a correctional officer, got promoted to a correctional sergeant, and then in 2008 I came down to District 6 Probation and Parole as a probation officer. In 2000, what year are we in now? In 2016, I was promoted to section supervisor, and then been 60 days as district manager. When JRI came about and it was enacted from probation and parole standpoint, it changed our whole world. Just to be perfectly frank about it. When I got hired in 2008, I wasn't hired for my motivational interviewing skills. I wasn't hired for the care and compassion that I would give to our offender population. I was hired because I knew how to wrestle with people and how to shoot a gun. When we enacted JRI, it changed probation and parole from a law enforcement entity to more of a community support entity. And Stephanie is a perfect example of what that can do for offenders, and especially for the female population. Everything that we've talked about thus far tonight, up until that point, was just a small little drop in the bucket of what my job consisted of. My job was to make sure people weren't using drugs, and if they were, I put the handcuffs on them and I took them to jail, and they went and saw their judge, and they did either a significant amount of time in county jail or maybe got sentenced to prison, and then they came out on parole or after doing a little time in county jail, and they came out again, and I would tell them to get into programming, even though I didn't really know what their programming was. And I would order them to basically a checklist of, this is A, B, C, and D, and you better do A, B, C, and D. And if you don't do all this, I'm not going to tell you how to do it or help you do it, but if you don't do all this, the handcuffs are going back on, and you're going back to jail, and you're going back in front of your judge. Is that kind of a fair assessment of how we used to do things?
Yeah, I'm really glad that Mr. Gentry described it like that, because as being someone who has been in the system since I was a minor up until, I was released from I gold sealed. Can you explain gold seal?
So gold seal is when you complete your sentence. So, and I don't know what yours was, but let's say you had in Idaho, you get a fixed amount of time and an indeterminate amount of time. So say you were sentenced to 2 years fixed, 3 years indeterminate. You would have to do at least 2 years if your sentence was imposed inside a correctional facility. After that, you could finish your time in a correctional facility, or you could come out on parole, but that end date is what the Department of Correction calls your gold cell. As long as you don't commit any new crimes, that end date that's it. That's when we're done with you. That's when you are officially off parole.
So when I gold sealed in 2014, from 1999 to 2014, there had been a dramatic shift in the way that probation and parole supervised returning citizens. I can say this as a returning citizen. The philosophy that we are working with now is much better than was back in the late 90s, early 2000s, because then it was very much a hook 'em and book 'em philosophy, as I like to say it. They were not treatment focused, very little treatment focused. It was very heavily a law enforcement perspective on corrections, and it didn't work for me, and I know it didn't work for a lot of other people. So,
and I'll be the first to admit it, having worked both sides of it and in the prison, it doesn't work. Not just for Stephanie. That philosophy does not work. And since JRI was enacted, we hire a different type of PO, and we train interviewing skills. I don't evaluate my POs on the skills I got evaluated for when I got hired. They're evaluated on how good a conversation they're having with their client, whether they're building a relationship with their client, and what they're doing to not only bring their social support network that they already had in place in to help with this, but also the community as a whole. It really is a combined effort between the community, the client, the Department of Corrections. If somebody's going to be successful, it takes all of us. My former boss used to say it takes a village, and it literally does take all those entities to have a chance for somebody to be successful. The problems, I wouldn't say the problems, but the learning curve is the biggest hurdle we have right now, and our staffing issues. And what I mean by learning curve is, just like Stephanie described, most of our population has either been in some kind of supervision period in their life before, or has talked to somebody, their associates, the people they rely on, family members, friends, have been in that type of situation before too. And the stereotype of, I'm here to put you away, to not give you a chance to succeed, just to monitor you, is a very hard stereotype to break. And we work at it every day. I feel we're making progress at it, but that stereotype will always be there. The other issue with JRI when it rolled out is we didn't get the staff, we didn't get all the staff that we asked for. If you listen to Stephanie's story and what her PO did, and I know her PO, and how they went out of their way and did all they could to help you succeed, if you break that down into 40-hour weeks, that takes a while, right? That takes a lot longer than putting handcuffs on her and taking her to county and writing a report and forgetting about her until she comes back out again. We are doing that. Stephanie's situation, we are trying to replicate that, and each PO has between 70 and 90 people on their caseload. We do our best. My POs, man, I'm pretty protective of them because they work very, very hard to make these successes happen, but just number-wise and logistically, it's dang near impossible, even if they could work 24 hours a day, to offer that service to everybody. And that's been, I don't know what the right number is. I wish I did, but that's been one of our biggest struggles is if I could get my POs down to 30, 35 people, I think they'd be manageable, and I think it would be, recidivism would take a big hit. I honestly do. And we're working on that. I'm always, every time I get a politician within earshot, I'm asking when they're going to give me more POs. But those, in my opinion, are our two biggest struggles: is staffing and stereotypes. A PO there's been a stereotype of what a probation and parole officer does, probably longer than I've been alive, and those are barriers we got to break down with the clients we service and their families and the community. We are a hybrid. We are law enforcement to an extent. We have arrest powers. We carry a gun. I wear a ballistic vest when I'm out in the field, but we are not interested in new crimes. We don't seek out new crimes, and our job is so much different than that of a police officer.
And the other thing that I wanted to add that's really important, and it's something I think that was another issue when they started the JRI, is that when that was first rolled out, it was rolled out in larger states that had larger populations, and that also had a reentry infrastructure where they had a lot of community-based organizations that had already been doing some of that work. And so that's something that I think I would call for, I think we have a good base to work on, especially when we think about the strides that parole and probation has really made in terms of changing, right? This institutional change is incredibly hard, by the way, because it takes a lot of institutional willpower to do this. But is also to help build up this community-based organization infrastructure. So where we have Hope and Recovery, right? But Hope and Recovery does need, right, a lot of support. It needs volunteers. It needs some financial support, and we need more agencies. For example, in New York City, there's a program that's specifically focused on women and women with families, right? And trying to provide support for women with families because they have very specialized needs that single women and also men tend not to have, right? Or if we're thinking about special housing, right? One of the programs in New York City, and there's a number that have this, but one of the gold standard programs in New York City is a Fortune Society, and they have a program they call the Castle, which is a residential program. People apply because there's only so many places, so many beds, but it's all, the Castle is largely managed by people who were formerly incarcerated, and it's a supportive living space, right? And they have meetings every week where they go through, everybody attends, they hash things out, they talk about challenges that people have had. And so doing my field work, because I studied prisoner reentry in New York City, that support by other formerly incarcerated people who are going through different steps of the process was also key, right? And I think trying to develop, self-help groups and community-based organizations that can interface with parole and probations becomes really important. I think there is a new program in Boise, right? There's Boise Caldwell Nampa. And I was trying to find the name on the phone, but they're well hidden. It's hard to search, hard to get the name when you're searching for.
Are you talking about their reentry program, their one-stop shop? And
yeah, where they have the coffee shop.
Right.
Right?
Yeah,
You come in.
systemic change of Idaho.
Thank you.
They're my friends.
Yeah, so that's a really important program, and we need something like that here in, I think in District 6 and in District 7, because we're also getting, when I was looking at some of the numbers, the folks that we're getting here actually tend to have higher risks and higher needs, right? And so they need those services even more,
Right.
right? And so anything we can do sort of on the community level in terms of thinking about that kind of thing is also going to be really important to assist parole and probation.
And to touch on that a little bit about the female perspective and the family model too, we are aware, the Department of Corrections, we would love to, we're working on it. We would love to, if a female's incarcerated and is pregnant, we've got things before the legislators where we're not trying to tear that family apart. We're trying to, we wish we could let them have the child, and the child could come up to the prison with them and spend those bonding moments in the first few months of their lives with them. And another thing we're extremely lacking on that we would love is we have I think we have like 4 female-only transitional houses here in Pocatello, but none of them take families. And that is liability-wise and all that, I understand, but we are working on, wouldn't that be great if a female that was struggling with addiction or other issues or not a safe home environment could be around other women and they could have their children with them living there, kind of like you said, like they do in New York, a cohabitation and use each other for support. And yeah, you're 100% right. We need to consider the whole family model, and we're working on it. We are.
And I hate to cut the conversation off right there because this is
No,
really
that's good. I
important
could go on all night, so
information.
you're gonna have to.
Mr. Gentry, I do want to thank you very much for sharing your perspective with us. I think that especially for this discussion, it's been extremely valuable. At this point, we do want to take a few minutes to take questions from anybody in the audience. If you'd like to ask any of our panelists a question, please go ahead and come up to the mic.
With this small group, can't you just ask for questions from the floor?
I absolutely could, and I appreciate your suggestion. Questions from the floor? We'll start with you.
I'm wondering what role the drug courts have under the Justice Reinvestment Act. Prior to that, they were doing a lot of the support services and accountability and everything that you're talking about. They had, as far as I know, social workers, mental health people, all sorts of people worked with the judge on a particular person's case, and if they did all of the requirements, the drug court, then I think their parole was successful, and they were free to re-enter society if they graduated from the drug court. So
You guys want me to take this one?
Yeah, you can take
I love this question.
So District 6 and District 7 are extremely invested into specialty courts. We have probably per capita the highest number of specialty courts in the state. I love specialty courts. That's a great question. That's the most bang for our buck in community supervision. All of my judges in my district work extremely hard. We have a drug court, a mental health court, a family treatment court. We have something called the Wood Court, which we stole some money from District 7 to start up that specialty court, to the point where even in my district we have something called the Crossroads Program, which I model after a specialty court. We do it with no money. I play the judge, and I have community treatment providers and community, Pocatello Chamber of Commerce sit on the panel. Because you're right, that team atmosphere, a whole team working on a client's individual needs, it is more successful. I love the model, and I was talking, I had my Crossroads today, I was talking to my team. it's almost like, and don't take this in a negative connotation, but it's almost like the participants in those specialty courts form a gang, but a positive gang. And they triumph with each other over their successes, and when somebody falls, more than the guy wearing the badge and the uniform, they lift each other up on their failures, and I'm a huge fan of specialty courts.
And has it increased since the
Yes.
act was passed?
And I can only speak for our district, but I think it's statewide. Yeah, we've, since 2014, like I said, we've added a specialty court. I just met with Judge Nass last Friday, talked about expanding seats on his drug court and his DUI court. The judges are very aware that it's the best bang for the buck on supervision, and a lot of those seats are Supreme Court funded, but we're always looking and trying to get more seats.
Thank you for answering that. Ms. Thurick?
So I have two very unrelated questions, and I'll ask the first one to Jimmy,
Yes.
is it, Mr. Gentry? And then the other is for any and all of you. But the first one, and maybe this is it's a difficult question and maybe a little politically incorrect, but I'm curious. You mentioned the idea that there just aren't enough hours in the day for your POs to give the kind of service that you talked about receiving. And I'm just curious about, you also mentioned the problem of stereotypes, and stereotypes tend to be based on gender and race and things like that. So I'm wondering how much discrimination, whether it be gender discrimination, racial discrimination, plays a role in who they choose to help more than others. Is that a problem too? Do some people get sort of better service or better treatment than others?
It's a good question, and it's a difficult question to quantify. I don't necessarily haven't seen any racial biases or gender biases, but I've seen personality biases, and if a client has an issue with their probation officer that they can't, and it's a personality issue, just like you might not get along with your neighbor, they know they can come in and talk to me, and we can work that out. Now, I'm careful about that because it might be that they're being held accountable and they don't particularly like that probation officer for that reason also. But there probably are, I can't speak statewide or nationwide, I'm sure there are some stereotypes. We do a lot to break those down. I don't see that a lot, and personalities are personalities. You have to know, as a district manager, as a supervisor, or as a PO, and I'll speak more to when I was a PO, I knew when I'd had enough, if that makes sense. If I had been working with somebody and there was an issue there, it started to get personal to me, I would go to my supervisor and ask, that they be transferred to another PO. Again, I don't want that to have a negative connotation, but again, POs aren't robots, they're human beings like the rest of us, and if there's a personality issue, or if you've worked and worked and worked, or you feel that you've worked and tried with somebody and it's not going to happen with you. My POs are pretty good at that, and taking that into consideration. Correct, yeah.
I went through 9 different POs, if that gives you an idea.
Yeah.
9 different POs before I found one that I worked well with, and she worked well with me. So there's always going to be, you would be living in a facade to think that there's not going to be issues and differences. Just like Mr. Gentry said, they are human beings just like the rest of us. So.
Yeah. Thank you. I know that was sort of an odd question, but it just struck me when you were talking about some of those issues that you deal with. My second question is, you talked about any chance you get working with politicians. Well, I'm not a state politician, but I'm a local politician, so Pocatello City Council. In fact, I kind of sit near where
This is your
right here. But I'm curious, a lot of the services we have in the area are county services, but can any of you tell me, as city council members or as a city council, what more can we do? What are some ideas that we can help support and do better in our community?
You know, I feel like I'm the only one talking. So, from my perspective, the city of Pocatello and Bannock County do a great job of supporting our population with little or no funding. By that I mean I have a intake, is what I call it, for everybody who's new to probation or parole every Tuesday at my office, and I go over some of the rules of probation with them and talk about, you know, some of the housekeeping chores of being on probation. But the great thing is, I have a bunch of community providers there too. I have Hope and Recovery there that tells everybody in that room that's new to probation about their program, explains it in detail. I have them talk about free transportation and all the services they'll offer. A Pocatello Free Clinic that comes in and talks about the services they offer, anywhere from dental to getting people mental health meds. I have some staffing agencies of employers that are nice enough to come in and tell, you know, because most people are looking for a job if they've been in jail or prison for a while, you know, tell them about some of the job opportunities that they have in the community. Southeast Idaho Help comes. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. On my Crossroads team, I have the Chamber of Commerce is on that team. As far as I'm concerned, and I tell my bosses in Boise every chance I get, this community has embraced our population, and we always can work to break down stereotypes, but and now that I know that you're on the city council, I'll probably be calling you, and I could use this, but we are really fortunate. We really are. There's 7 districts in the state of Idaho, and Southeast Idaho, District 6 and District 7 seem to have a ton of support from the community.
Well, if there are specific things that you need from us or that, you know, we could do,
I'm going to get your number after this.
let me know. Yes.
I do have an idea to support that. I think a great way that you as a council member and your community could support these returning citizens and our officers is to be supportive of programs like Free to Succeed. Free to Succeed is a mentor program that's offered. It's a statewide initiative through the Idaho Department of Correction, and we are actively seeking people to mentor these returning citizens. When we do that, when we mentor these returning citizens, we are building safer communities, we're building healthier people, and we're making these PO's jobs a heck of a lot easier, which means that they have more focused time on people like me, so you are getting more success stories. So
I would add to that too, that being a community that has a university, we're perfectly poised for that because we have professors with and graduate students with, you know, writing skills. They can help with cover letters and resumes and all sorts of different skills that we have experts here. So I think even partnering, you know, and obviously we do partner with ISU, but doing that even more to help programs like that. I think, you know, we've got a lot of people here that would be great mentors, but maybe they don't even know about that opportunity. So
they should know.
Well, we've been pushing it pretty hard, but no.
Right.
And just to say one more thing about that, that was a great. I agree 100%. Somebody on the city council too, just to maybe show up to a drug court graduation or when somebody gets off probation, it means. It seems like such a small thing, but the Crossroads program we run at our district, when somebody does succeed in that program and graduates from all the phases, our judiciary, I'll have the public defender's office, a couple people come from there. I'll have the prosecutor's office of the people that put them in jail or you know, tried them on their charge in the first place. I'll show up and we'll have cupcakes and, you know, shake hands, and it means a lot to this population that to know that the community cares and is supportive of them, because they have that stigma, whether it's perceived or not, that that they're less than.
And I would say, we have arguably a more engaged council and mayor than we've maybe ever had or had in a long time. And so I think that if we know about those things, you would very likely get at least a few of us that would come. If there's a way to get on a notification list or something to know when something's
I will get your information right after that, yeah.
I will do everything I can, because we do need to celebrate the successes.
Just throwing it out there, there's a drug court graduation tomorrow at 5:30.
Okay. Where at?
Bannock County, Bannock County Courthouse, Judge Nass.
Tomorrow's
I know.
council.
I know that short notice, but I will get your information, and I would love to send you guys emails on it.
And I wanted to add kind of to that is that this is something where Idaho is actually poised to do better than larger states like New York that may actually have more funding, but because Idaho is smaller, right, and people, that's one of the benefits, right? Everybody kind of knows everybody, and so I think that this is a way that, it's easier to get people involved, right? And to even provide that support, the support, you don't even necessarily have to come to me, but if it helps if we can overcome some of our personal stigmas too, right? And to say hi or be friendly, right, to somebody who's coming home, or do you need anything, right? Those things aren't necessarily institutional, but it's that kind of community support is also really important.
And I just want to be mindful of everybody's time. It is 8 o'clock. This has been a great discussion. I want to thank our panelists for being here. Did we miss any questions? I'm catching up.
I had an idea to kind of help with the city council thing as well as a question. So I was wondering maybe if it was worth creating like a nonprofit organization not directly associated with ISU to help transition inmates into the college. Mm-hmm. So like maybe if we just have like a special like office there.
There is a Center for New Directions at ISU.
That's
it's
focused on reentry though.
But it's not, so like the thing I'm going to say, there's a Center for New Directions is really good in helping people get in, but it's not really focused on the needs of formerly incarcerated people. And formerly incarcerated people have very specialized needs. So you almost need to have, and this goes for also the kids who are coming in out of YDC and stuff like that, because they have similar needs to the incarcerated adults. Because there is that stigma and that fear, and I have people disclose to me a lot, right? Because I'm the person they feel safe disclosing to because of what I teach. Where they need to have that support of knowing somebody's got their back, that there's somebody they can talk to, because sometimes they're going to run into professors who are scared of them, right? Or who may not want them in class, because that does happen, that stigma does happen. So they're going to need to have that kind of advocacy built in. We have some stuff that's kind of a little hit or miss. We need more institutional framework. So yeah, that's something that I'm really interested in, is how do we build that up? So yeah, that's definitely would be a really cool idea.
I totally agree with you with that. Dr. Levine was the first professor out of my entire college career that I felt comfortable with sharing that I was a returning citizen. And she has had my back 100%. So I would not go to the Center for New Directions simply because they do not understand people like me. Dr. Levine does. So.
That's a great suggestion.
One topic that you haven't discussed, and if you like, I'll wait till afterwards and ask it so people can leave if you're committed to leaving at 8 o'clock.
I'm not committed. I just want to respect your guys' time.
Carry on.
In your figures, you said 50% of the women had children or responsibilities for children.
Oh, so it was actually more than 50%. Yeah, the 50% number was for people who had experienced sexual or physical assault. Right, so the majority of women who are actually going into prison do have children.
Okay, and so I'm wondering, just all the different practices seem to tear the woman apart from her children. Mm-hmm. And she suffers. I've been there, and one woman told me she hadn't seen her children in 2 years. And certainly the child suffers. I've been to prisons where the infants are allowed to stay with their mothers, and I'm not sure we have room for that here. I think Warden Gentry, and is that a relation with?
That's my boss. Yeah, that's my wife.
She was going to be here tonight, but she's not feeling.
Yeah, she's ill.
Yeah.
And she knew I had a big enough mouth.
Strongly supportive of, of letting infants and small children stay with their mothers. But this was brought up years ago in the legislature. It was kind of turned down. And now I'm not sure there's space for it if they were convinced to allow that to happen. But I know it's been very successful in New York and very successful in Washington State and other places. But meanwhile, there's the other children. Where are they staying while their mother is incarcerated? Along with grandmothers or foster homes or something. And we hear all about these children separated at the border and the psychological effect on them. Well, there must be a similar psychological effect on children within our state that are separated from their mothers.
So I don't have the number right off the top of my head, but having an incarcerated parent, whether a mother or father, increases the likelihood of a child becoming incarcerated, right? And there are a lot of collateral consequences for the children. I know one of the things that they've done in New York, and unfortunately they had some cutbacks, and so they were cutting back the buses. But I know in New York there's been a real push to enable children to visit, right? And to, at the very least, try to set up, and now this is both in the men's prisons and in the women's prisons, family-friendly spaces where kids can interact with their parents, right? And again, this is one of those things, this costs money, right? The buses and everything, and so it's part of, and this is something that legislators can do, right? And everybody can kind of do if you pester your legislator enough, right? If you pay them the butt, eventually they'll kind of pay attention. But is to kind of to push so that we can have the funding for that, right? And so to be able to create spaces that are both safe, institutionally speaking, and also safe for the families.
I agree that I'm going to disparage my own gender for a moment. I worked at the women's prison, but I've got a lot of time in at the South Boise complex with all the men's prisons too. I was a member of the tactical team for a really long time, but that's not my point. The sad thing about the women's prison that hits you pretty quickly is visiting day. Warden Gentry, my wife, and wardens before them encourage children to come up and visit as often as possible. The dichotomy between the men who bring the children up to see the women as compared to even Idaho Maximum Security Institution, the women who bring the children to see the male who's incarcerated is night and day. It's something that a lot of people probably don't think about unless you've worked in both environments. But visiting day at a male institution is hectic. It's full of a lot of people. It's robust, and there's a lot of good visits going on. A lot of times up at the women's prison, it's crickets. There's 2 or 3, and they offer visiting all the time. So I agree financially. A big part of the problem, though, is just the gender difference of is whoever's responsible for that child going to bring them to the prison. I just had to point that out because I've noticed that for years.
One more question. In the county jail, if a child were to be brought to see a parent, are they allowed to go past that? Can they ever touch their parent?
In county jail, in Bannock County Jail, and most bigger counties, all visits since technology was invented are no contact, which means they're video visits. I know what you're talking about. The screen, the glass. They don't even do the glass screen through the phones anymore. It's all on a video screen. But counties are not long-term holding facilities. I know it feels like that if you're in there. I'm not saying that, but they're not. People usually aren't sentenced to years in county. They're awaiting trial or awaiting adjudication of something there.
I've had mothers in jail saying, I've just told my family not to bring my child here. It's so traumatic for them, it's so traumatic for me. When I get to prison, then they can come and visit me. So.
And unfortunately, I agree with you. It's a sad situation, and I wish it was better.
I am going to say something that's maybe a little bit sounds a little counterintuitive, especially coming from me and my perspective, but we really need that bond to expand and improve that jail. That jail is in really bad shape, and I mean, I've been talking to people who've been staying there, almost dangerous, right, for both the staff and the people who are incarcerated there, right? So that's something that we really got to get out there about.
It does. It's a misconception, and we're just arresting too many people. What a lot of people don't know about the Bannock County Jail is it is extremely packed in there, overcrowded. But a lot of people don't know about some of the programming and work release and programs that Bannock County has in place. The SHARE program, which is an inpatient treatment program that keep people from going to a state correctional facility by trying to give them that treatment option while they're in county jail before they become a parolee or a prisoner. It's a hard sell. I know exactly what you're talking about. The perception every time the bond comes up is just quit arresting so many people. We could all get into the intricacies of that, but there are good things going on out there, and we do need to expand that at some point.
Can I add one thing to that point too? Another thing that a lot of people don't understand is if we don't do it ourselves, the feds are going to come in and tell us to do it, and that's about to happen. And they will dictate how much we have to spend and how we have to do it. So it's much better that we make those decisions rather than being told how we're going to do them. And that's something that was not put out there enough with the bonds, and I think many more people would support the bonds if they knew that.
Right,
so,
I agree.
We have to do something one way or another, but it's just whether we get to decide how to do it or whether they tell us. But it does have to happen.
Yes.
You had a question?
Yes, just to start, I have to plug the Center for New Directions because I was a counselor there for 2 years, and I had numerous people come in who had records that when we looked at their careers and what they wanted to do, that we were careful not to put them in a position where they would spend a lot of money on school and then not be able to get a job once they got into this society. And the crimes were from drug possession to murder, that the people I work with. So they do, I mean, it's not as strong resources I can see that, needs to be there, but they are aware and do focus on that kind of thing when they have people coming in. My other question, and I guess it's for you, Jimmy, and I don't know how much you can speak to it, but in your research you showed that there is a need for that social support group and that's, for me anyway, that's an obvious thing. And you talked about in the specialty courts, they become almost like family. Recently, just this year, we've had 2 suicides in the DUI court. The people inside the court are not allowed to reach out to each other outside of the court. I'm familiar with several of those people, and they feel that those maybe could have been prevented had they been able to have contact with each other because they have that strong family bond. Do you know if there's any addressing of that going on in the courts?
And I'm going to be careful. I say there is addressing going on of that, again, it's a stereotype of how we used to do business, and we're all at different phases coming to realize that we probably weren't always right. Stephanie, you probably remember Back when I started, it was right there on a piece of paper you sign. You will not associate with any known felons unless strictly given permission by your probation officer. That has changed somewhat. We've actually changed the wording of that rule, but as we morph through JRI and as we learn what we're doing, we shouldn't have worded it like that, is what I'll say. We should, if two people are actively using together, or actively abusing each other, or we should, and we do, the PO should have the discretion to say, I do not want you associating with that person. But that goes along the stereotype of that's what everybody thinks when they read that rule. It probably still shows up in parole agreements too. And you're 100% right. What I've seen the success of specialty courts is that they can all talk to each other. And I don't know if we realized, as we were changing everything, I don't know if that was a low-hanging fruit. I don't know how long it took to occur to all of us. I know it took a while for it to occur to me, even though I thought it in my head, to actually start telling that to my clients is, no, I want you to associate. It is being addressed, and just, we're at the point, and I feel like I'm plugging my Crossroads program, but I require them to, when a new person comes in, they all have to have each other's cell phone numbers so they can text night or day and talk about things that their PO doesn't get involved in.
How clear that is to them, because the ones that have spoken to me have been very clear about, I'm willing to take this sanction if one of my people calls me in the middle of the night because they're intimidating themselves, because they don't believe that they can contact each other. And like you say, they're such a close-knit group, they're going through such a experience together that they should be allowed to contact each other. And
good things are, and all I can say is good things are coming, and yes, it's being addressed.
Thank you.
There were additional hands up. Did anybody else have a question?
I had a question, kind of a follow-up on the comments about the county jail. I have the sense that there are a fair number of people sitting in that jail, taking up a bed, waiting to either get sentenced or plead to their case, have a trial, get sentenced, or waiting for a bed in the state system or the federal system, for that matter. And I think that's some of the pushback from the public on the bond, is the sense that we're not running that part of the system efficiently. I mean, it's great that we're doing things at the tail end of folks getting out, what you were addressing today, but I think until the public is satisfied that we're doing a good job at the front end of the system, you're going to get pushback from people who are fairly progressive on lots of bond issues, saying, I don't think I want to build any more bricks and mortars, whether it's a county jail or a state prison.
I agree, and we're running into, it's a very tricky issue with a lot of different angles, and we're running into that on the state side too. Is they're saying we need a new prison. There's so many different angles to that also. Do we really need another brick and mortar prison in Idaho? And we could sidebar after this and talk for hours about, let's build it. How are we going to staff it? Mm-hmm. We're down hundreds of correctional officers statewide right now. So where are we going to build it? How are we going to staff it? And all the other resources that go around that. So I understand what you're saying. I understand contract beds and people waiting for sentencing, and can they be out in the community? Are there other options? Could they be on a GPS monitor? Could they be checking in for testing? All those things are in place to some degree, but I understand what you're saying, and I respect that opinion. I really do. I understand that.
So, Timmy, do you think that the Justice Reinvestment bill has possibly this year relieved any of your overworked staff? Do you? I know the legislature's still in and they're not out yet, but they have the past 2 weeks been diligently working on that. Do you think that it has relieved maybe a percentage?
So if, what you're saying is if it gets passed all the way through and if those new positions come, I sure hope so. I don't count my chickens before they're hatched, and even if we do get those positions, then I have to call Boise. I'm sure everybody's heard everything happens from Boise, and I have to lobby and tell them, hey, you got this many positions, how many am I getting? And they may say none, they may say one, they may say, it's a work in progress. It will help statewide if we get those positions. How it will affect District 6 or District 7 remains to be seen. And just like I was talking prison logistics with you, we get the positions, and I'm not trying to end this panel on a negative note. We got to figure out physical places to put those POs too. I'm very lucky in my district that we overbuilt when we had the chance, so I can take on a couple POs, but they're stacked like cordwood in District 4, and so 10 more POs of just physically where to put them is also something we have to think about as we get them. But I'll take all the POs they'll throw my way.
Did anybody else have a question that they wanted to answer or ask?
Is there anything that we, as a community, Councilwoman Lurick, can we write letters? Can we do anything about getting you more parole officers? What, a community outreach of any type? Does that help?
Yes. To a point. I have to kind of walk a thin line. I've had so many great local politicians grab my director and pull him aside and tell him the great things my district's doing and how I need more help, to a tipping point almost sometimes. We have a new director with the Idaho Department of Corrections, Josh T-Walt. I really like Josh. I've known him for quite a long time, and I think he's going to move our department, keep moving our department in a great direction. But yes, if you run into our director, our deputy director, any of my chiefs or bosses, yes, tell them, man, I met Jimmy and he needs more POs.
Tell your governor too, write our governor and write the Board of Corrections. Let them know what you see as a community, what you see as a state that's needed. Let them know that you see that these POs are overworked, and if they had less people on their caseload, that you would have stronger, safer communities.
Thank you guys very much. Those were some great questions and a great discussion. Jamar will come up and close us out.
I don't want to take up any more of your time. I do want to thank the panelists, and I want to thank Annie and Lisa. They put a lot of effort into this and did a lot of research. So thank you to you too. And we are the League of Women Voters. If any of you have any questions or comments for us, we can hang out here for just a little bit. So just thank you for being here. We appreciate your time and all of your efforts to the community. So thank you.